Cyclone Jasper has strengthened to a Category 2 cyclone. It's now 24 hours from its expected landfall just north of Port Douglas, Queensland. Cyclone Jasper is back up to Category 2 status at this time. It's looking a lot more impressive on all forms of satellite imagery and on radar imagery as well. It's also producing some pretty damaging winds across Willis Island and the other adjacent reefs in the area. Your latest update brought to you by Force 13 Australia at this time. Please do consider subscribing. We're getting closer to 7,000 subscribers at this point, and leave a like on the video while you're at it and tell us how we can improve in the comment section down below. But here is a look at Cyclone Jasper at this time. You can see the Bureau of Meteorology holding with Category 1 status right now, but we believe it's a Category 2, winds of 90 kilometres an hour sustained, gusting to 130 kilometres an hour. That is a significant wind gust in the centre of this system, and it is only going to get stronger as it approaches Cairns. It will then cross the Cape York Peninsula and move into the Gulf of Carpentaria, where it could strengthen again, some forecast models bringing it up towards Darwin as a tropical low cyclone as we approach Christmas time. So the storm has a little bit left in the tank, that's for sure, after it belts through the Cape York Peninsula, where a landfall is expected early tomorrow morning. So here's a look at Cyclone Jasper on the Bureau of Meteorology forecast cones and the multi-model diagnostics. You can see the storm is expected to strengthen just a little bit more up towards Category 1 status on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Sustained winds probably going to peak out on this second peak at around 60 knots. That's 130 kilometres an hour, 10 minutes sustained. Deep layer wind shear as well dropping. It's becoming a lot more favourable for the system, and sea surface temperatures are going to increase, and same with relative humidity, which means that the storm is going to have a lot of fuel to intensify just before landfall. And now the only factor holding this storm back is going to be time. So we've got a cyclone warning from Cape Flattery to Townsville, not including Townsville, extending inland to Chillagoe, and a cyclone watch for Cape Melville to Cape Flattery, extending inland to Palmerville. The cyclone warning is including Cairns and adjacent communities. You can see the cyclone expected to pass through Cairns as a Category 2 strength system. Sustained winds probably going to be approaching the 110 to 120 kilometre an hour mark. It could be a little bit stronger than that as it approaches landfall. In fact, some models daring to predict once again that we're expecting a severe tropical cyclone landfall on Cairns or just north of Cairns around Port Douglas. So we'll take a look at the forecast models at this time, courtesy of Whitney.com. You can see the cyclone moving in Wednesday morning as a strengthening tropical cyclone as well. You can see those red gale force winds wrapping around the centre of the system, which is that whole feature in the middle of the storm. You can see it wraps itself up quite nicely just before landfall, then moves into the Gulf of Carpentaria, where substantial strengthening is possible north of Mornington Island. And then I believe wind shear might get to the system, or maybe not in this forecast run, from the Access G3, the Bureau of Meteorology's own forecast model, moving over Groote Island as a tropical cyclone there, and then over Kakadu sort of region. Interesting forecast there. We're going to play this through a little bit faster right now, but the main picture is a significant landfall on Cairns is expected, with substantial rainfall and some pretty significant wind gusts as well. We could be seeing wind gusts approach 175 kilometres an hour over Cairns as this cyclone moves through, so very damaging wind gusts indeed, and they have the power to rip roofs off homes, down power lines and down trees. So we're going to switch it up now and take a look at the ECMWF 10 metre wind run. So you can see the ECMWF calling for a much more organised tropical cyclone in its initialisation, intensifying up towards, gets very close actually to Category 3 status as it makes its landfall just south of Cooktown. The further north this cyclone goes, the stronger it is going to be. So in the end, it really doesn't change the scope of the picture for Cairns. It just really directly impacts the landfall site, which in this case looks to be around sort of Wudgel, just south of Cooktown. But again, Cairns will definitely receive tropical cyclone force winds sustained for maybe 6 or so hours as this cyclone makes its passage through. The main threat as well, or one of the main threats as well, is rainfall. This cyclone isn't racing through, that's for sure, so rainfall totals will likely be pretty high. We're expecting some isolated falls up to 400 to 500 millimetres. 6 hourly totals could approach 150 millimetres for anywhere between Cooktown and Cairns as this cyclone moves through. I'm going to end it up here with some radar imagery. You can see the cyclone really becoming a lot more organised, with these rain bands rotating around an eye-like feature, which is just the northeast of Holmes Reef at this point. It'll then blow through Bougainville Reef a little bit later on into today and early into tomorrow as it lines up for its final landfall on Cairns. Let's jump over to the forecast models on windy.com and get another look at the picture. Starting things off here with a little look at the radar imagery and overlaid with wind observations. You can see sustained winds of 26 knots on Willis Island. Down towards Flinders Reef, they're approaching cyclone intensity at 33 knots out of the east. And then Holmes Reef up here, which is the interesting observation that I want to bring up here, 22 knots sustained out of the southeast. And if you take a look at the radar imagery, it looks like it's getting really close to this cyclone's eye. It's definitely got an eye trying to develop right now under some pretty deep convection. Which we'll take a look at in just a second, but you can see these rain bands wrapping around into the center of the system, and it looks like Holmes Reef here is approaching into the eye of the system. Now, what's going to be interesting over the next couple of hours is taking a look at the wind observations at Bougainville Reef. So we're pretty sure that the eastern side of the system is the strongest side of the system, but we don't have any wind observations in what looks to be a developing eye wall on the eastern side of the system. We really want to get a scope of the picture of how strong the winds are over at Bougainville Reef over the next couple of hours, and which we will be giving updates on the channel, so make sure you stick around. We want to see how strong the winds get here, because that will give us a very good idea at how strong this cyclone actually is, and then it will give a pretty good idea at how strong the cyclone is expected to be as it makes landfall or just north of Cairns on the far north Queensland coastline. So let's take a look at the satellite imagery right now. It is looking a lot prettier than it did yesterday. You can see on the infrared satellite imagery the intense thunderstorms highlighted in the reds and the blacks. This is where heavy rainfall is and the most damaging winds are. So if you look at infrared satellite imagery and you're seeing reds and blacks over where you are, you can expect some pretty intense thunderstorms to just be about to move through or moving through at that time. And on the visible satellite imagery, this is a look at the storm just with no color alterations. You can see the cyclone here. It's really starting to wrap itself up. It's got beautiful banding features here, and it looks like it is rotating very nicely as an intensifying tropical cyclone would. So it's intensifying a lot earlier than we initially thought, which is bad news for Queensland, because it means that it's going to have more time to get up to a pretty high intensity, up to high-end Category 2. Once again, I believe that this system could tickle Category 3 status. The forecast models and the Bureau of Meteorology not agreeing with me right now. However, I reckon the system's going to get very close to that as it makes its landfall. Still, nonetheless, a high-end Category 2 or a low-end Category 3, there's hardly any difference in terms of actual wind speeds and expected damage. However, we will still see a pretty powerful tropical cyclone move through, and I can't reiterate that enough. Between Cooktown and Port Douglas, expect a powerful tropical cyclone landfall tomorrow morning, probably at around 8 to 11 a.m. local time. That seems to be the time that we're expecting the landfall at this time. And we'll take a look at the Bureau of Meteorology's forecast model for Wednesday morning. You can see, about 11 a.m. my time, which is approaching 2 p.m. local time. You can see the cyclone making its final approach for Cooktown, just north of Wujal, and you can see these cyclone conditions, which are highlighted in the red, moving through anyway north of Cairns. So this model run is actually a pretty good picture for Cairns. They'll probably dodge the worst of the system, but for Port Douglas and Wujal, that's a pretty grim forecast run to have, considering how strong the cyclone could potentially be and where it's moving through. Now, the ECMWF forecast model, which has been semi-reliable with this cyclone, same with the GFS, you can see that the cyclone expected to make landfall around 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, with these winds being brought along into Cairns. It's a significantly weaker system, so I don't think that this picture is going to materialise. I'd rather take a look at the GFS model, which you can see Wednesday afternoon. We'll see this cyclone move through, and the reason the winds are so weak on the GFS model is because this model is a low resolution model, which means it's not able to really get a full scope and understanding of how strong the winds are in the cyclone. So you could extrapolate that and say we're probably looking at a Category 2 landfall right over Port Douglas there, which is in line with what the Bureau of Meteorology is saying. So that again is a pretty reliable solution to look at. Now we're going to take a look at predicted rainfall totals from this cyclone. The Bureau of Meteorology itself highlighting predicted totals above 300 millimetres in places, with isolated 24-hour totals between Cooktown and down towards Innisfail. We could be seeing up to 450 millimetres in places. Now, there are definitely some places that are going to pick up a substantial amount of rainfall. I don't think there's going to be insane rainfall that's going to be widespread. It's going to be mainly concentrated on the coast for the time being. But you can see anywhere north of sort of Townsville, we could be seeing these heavy showers move through, and they could dump some pretty significant 6-hourly totals. Cardwell, Tully, Innisfail, all expecting up to 200 millimetres of rain, and up towards, as you start getting towards Cairns, you'll be seeing those totals increase up to about 300 millimetres. Cairns itself myself expecting 300 or nearly 300 millimeters from this cyclone. Port Douglas, much more, up to 600 millimeters is possible. And then as you get up towards Cooktown, this is where the forecast really becomes wacky, up to 1,000 millimeters. I don't think that's going to materialize, definitely not for a coastal community. You could probably be expecting up to 400 millimeters for Cooktown, Wujal, Cape Tribulation, and Port Douglas. However, some inland places might pick up substantially more, up to 600 millimeters is possible. And then as the cyclone crosses the Cape York Peninsula, widespread totals above sort of the 50 to 150 millimeter mark are expected. And then as it moves into the Gulf of Carpentaria, you'll see the rainfall significantly ease off. But still, a lot of rainfall down here for sort of Mornington Island and down towards Robinson River, this sort of area. This is desert, very dry desert stuff, so that's a lot of rainfall for that part of Queensland and the Northern Territory, so the flooding risk remains very widespread from this system. Let's take a look at waves and expected storm surge. That's a common comment on this channel and on these videos, is how big is the storm surge that we are expecting. I would say anything above 1 to 2 meters above the high tide marker is a good estimate for storm surge at this time. 2 meters is definitely pushing it. That's likely not going to happen, but it's best to be prepared for the absolute worst case scenario. Wave heights approaching Cairns will probably be up towards that 5 meter mark, so not anything absolutely absurd. However, it could definitely cause some pretty significant coastal erosion throughout Cairns and into the river delta around Cairns and some of the mangrove areas extending up towards Cooktown. You could see some coastal erosion and that sort of stuff. Nothing absolutely phenomenal or anything, but you could definitely still be seeing some pretty substantial amounts, that's for sure. We'll take one final look at the cyclone. You can see it is wrapping itself up really nicely at this time. Beautiful banding features, some great outflow up towards the northern side of the system, and some great inflow towards the eastern side of the system that's starting to curl in, and it looks like it's really trying to develop an eye wall at this time. And if it does get an eye wall together, well, then we could really be seeing a potential Category 3 tropical cyclone make landfall. So the headline is a significant tropical cyclone expected to cross the coast between Cairns and Cooktown tomorrow morning. There'll be plenty more coverage on this channel, so make sure you are subscribed and leave a like on the video while you're at it. Make sure you are rushing your preparations to completion, but after about sort of this afternoon, this evening, conditions will become too rough to sort of complete any meaningful preparations. I'm going to leave a checklist at the end of the video for you to pause and screenshot. Make sure your family is all aware of this cyclone as well. Really just give them the full briefing on what the situation is from this storm, because it is a significant system and it has the potential to cause quite a bit of damage, especially with how much it's weakened. I think people have become slightly more complacent with this system, believing that it's not going to do anything. This storm could still pack a pretty significant punch, that's for sure. So make sure you are really preparing for the absolute worst in this system and hoping for the best while you're at it. So yeah, that basically does it for this cyclone update brought to you by Force 13 Australia. Please do consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel as well. We've seen some absolutely phenomenal growth the last couple of days, and it's been great, and we've got plans to continue it. So make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss out on any more updates. But that's the latest from us, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.
Thank you for watching our content this update. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to get more updates covering all things weather and geophysics impacting Australia and the Oceania region. Subscribe to our other channels for more content from across the network, and be sure to check out our website where you can find free access to floater and radar imagery and articles on everything weather and much more. If you wish to support us directly, you can purchase some of our merchandise. We have a wide variety of clothing and homeware, or you can become an Ultimate Fan, which is the best way to directly support us, granting you some sweet perks and offers, including features in our custom storm animations, live streams, and much more.